Look, if people are going to trust HR, then HR actually needs to be trustworthy. And right now, we've got some work to do. This episode gets into the stuff that's hard to hear. The feedback is loud and clear in our research that HR is falling short on trust, empathy, and confidentiality. I'm not going to sugarcoat it because this is kind of the whole point of this podcast. But we're also talking about what works, like flipping the pyramid. What if the best answers to your company's biggest problems aren't sitting with the executive suite? They're with the people on the ground, and all you have to do is ask. People are stressed right now. They need to feel safe, and HR has a real shot at being the thing that actually helps, which is what we were always meant to do. Little by little, we can fix it. Welcome to Don't Talk to HR. Let's get into it. I am your co-host, Amy Hanlon-Radamik, or just Amy HR, and direct from India is Neeru Mehta.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here in person, meeting after 1 year, and really, really happy to be hosting this podcast today. And what we are going to cover today is something very close to our heart, something that we have felt every day as part of our job, and something we believe is going to be very important for many of you who are listening to us today.
So today we're talking about trust, empathy, and confidentiality, which were a few items that came up in our survey results and the conversations that we had that said that's something we are lacking in HR. And this is really hard to hear because I know both you and I are very empathetic people, and we try to be showing that and being role models for our team, but clearly there's a reputation that's out there. So actually I want to start with a quick story from the book. So in every chapter of the book, we have a story about how HR has failed people, meant to more be fun, but these stories are serious nonetheless. So here's one story. I had an insurance issue that I discussed with one person in HR privately and mentioned to no one else. My coworker then asked me about it an hour later, meaning my coworker's buddy in HR must have gossiped about my issue, which was totally inappropriate. Now, sadly, we do have a tendency to attract gossips into our profession. It's true. I know I've certainly experienced it. I have had to have conversations with people to say, you've got to keep things confidential. It's in the job description. And if you can't keep things confidential, you shouldn't be in the profession. Right?
Yeah, 100%. My journey in HR started with an experience like that.
Did it?
Absolutely. So for the viewers, you'll see it in the intro section of our books. But, my first job was in the finance function in a multinational company. I had some issues with the manager, discussed with HR, never taken care of. Actually, it began there for me that, we got to do something about it. And that's where I kind of chose the career path in HR. And today, after 25 years of kind of working with people, as much as I work or partner with the business, the employee advocacy is at the center of it. And that means trust, confidentiality, empathy, all has to be front and center for every HR person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true. And I have to say, unfortunately, I have met those people. There are bad actors in HR. There's no doubt about it. We've all met them. I had one manager a long time ago that liked to pit other HR people against each other. So she would seek gossip about other HR employees and then turn around and say, oh, you know what so-and-so said about you. It was just a really weird sort of toxic environment. I mean, let's break this down, actually. So there's the empathy piece. This one is really tricky. This is one of the key points in our book that we talk about because we are put in a very tough position where we are asked to be the employee advocates and the defenders of the company, right? The protectors of the company. So I call that the corporate police role and the employee advocacy role. And these are completely at odds, right? And so we often find ourselves in a situation where we want to be more empathetic, but we can't because of conflicting reasons. A prime example would be layoffs, right? We try to be as empathetic as we can, but at the end of the day, this person's losing their job. And, that's a really tough situation. Another example would be anytime there's any sort of discipline or investigation that takes place. Yeah. Anytime someone is on the receiving end of an investigation, that's when our empathy is seen as lacking because we're grilling you and maybe not understanding completely it from your perspective. At least that's the perception. And this is one of the areas that we've talked about that we think it would be better if we split this out. And I'm talking the investigations piece solely.
Yeah.
and put that where it belongs, which is either in legal or in a separate ombuds department that is tasked with conducting objective investigations and not necessarily the ones that are also have to return to dealing with advocacy for employees on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and that's possibly much needed as the organizations grow bigger. But when you talk about smaller, mid-sized organizations, we don't have the luxury of, segmenting out and bringing specialists for each function. But I just want to kind of stay on that point of layoffs. It's a very important point. It's what we're seeing happening in the world. Last few years, it's just been like a constant thing. And every time, and I've been part of like the leadership teams who have sat down in the room, taken those decisions, restructuring, all of that. So I think there are times when we cannot control the what.
Right.
It is kind of like, a decision that's made. But, as HR leaders, we do have the choice to control the how. What kind of an experience you give to an outgoing employee. How do you talk about transitions? How do you talk about, just the first conversation around what happened? What's the reason? So I feel like for any other change or, decisions that organizations take, we've got to carry out communication that well. I've done that in the past where we had some 100 employees to be laid off. For every single conversation, an HR person or business partner spent around an hour each, which meant around 100 hours of conversations, just to kind of like explain everything and then talk about what's going to happen next and listen to them. Some people would cry. Some people would just get so emotional. Some people would actually get angry. So, like to absorb all those emotions, that's the how part, and it's very difficult. It's much easier to kind of like do it with an email. Many companies do that. So you control the how, and you can influence that in a big way with leaders, with boards. Like, the decision is made, but let us do it in the best possible way.
Right. And I just find it appalling when companies lay off people via email. I think that is the tackiest thing that you can do. And I understand because I worked at large companies where you have to lay off thousands of people in a day. And it's tricky. You can't really sit down for an hour with each person. Ideally, that would be the norm. But when you're doing it at scale, it's much different. But I do think there's ways that we could do this better, right? One company that I was interviewing several people for this book about expressed dismay because they'd been at this particular company for 20 years and they got laid off in a 3-minute phone call, and then that was it. They were kicked out and shut down and treated like a criminal on the way out. And that doesn't feel good when you've put that much time into an organization. I think there's ways that, we can really take a better look at this and pour more empathy into it and at least show the respect and dignity for people who've put a long time and a lot of work and effort into it. Now, on a grander scale, and you made an excellent point, which is if you're at a smaller company or a mid-sized company, you don't really have the luxury of taking investigations and pulling it out and maybe giving it to legal. You might not even have internal legal counsel at that point. So you still have to kind of navigate that path. But as you get bigger, then we can start to say, okay, anytime there's a case of fraud or harassment or something like that needs an investigation, let's give the investigations over to a centralized objective unit so that we're not accused of being just the corporate police, right? Now, at the same time, we do have a role to, be looking out for the company's best interest, but in my mind, that includes the human beings that work for that company. So I think that statement that we could use more empathy, I appreciate that feedback, and I think that there's some truth to that for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, you cannot imagine people who've given it their all to just kind of let go without like a proper chat.
Right.
So, and it's not just layoffs, it's many things. It's many more things, people getting unwell, people falling sick, people needing a break, medical reasons. All of those are scenarios where HR can step in and make it happen.
Yeah.
So, and people remember you for that. People remember the company for that. that's where, and that's how you possibly become a great place to work.
We saw that at GL, at GlobalLogic. That was the thing. And it was kind of, we were in the unique situation where COVID kicked in and we didn't really know. There was no playbook for this. We didn't have any specific list of actions. We just jumped in and said, okay, let's do what we can. Let's help. And that skyrocketed our engagement scores because we were able to show empathy. We also had an amazing CEO who was a very, very empathetic individual. And I think that really helped with that overall sentiment. But then COVID disappears and we're back to where we were.
Yeah, and one question that I have, what's happening to the world now? Like the companies, like the FANG companies or, the companies that were known to be the best employers, known to be the places people would want to dream of working there are the ones being most ruthless.
It's true. It's true. And especially with AI, they're cutting jobs and very quickly, not addressing the fear factor of, is AI going to take over my job or what's going to happen in this global economy? Right now, more than anything, I think we need to double down on the empathy factor and understand that people are stressed out. They are scared. There's so much going on right now, and this is causing a large distraction. People are distracted from their jobs. They're worried about the future. They're worried about the economy, things like that. And this is where we really need to step up and pay attention and do what we can to help alleviate some of that fear.
Yeah.
This is happening a lot, and this is nothing new. It's not like this is a new phenomenon. As industry has expanded, we're moving so quickly and so fast that when you're in that kind of mode, you're just in execution mode and your empathy tends to kind of take a back seat. But for us, I think this is a great opportunity because AI can take over a lot of the tasks so that we can spend more time focused on the empathy factor when it's needed the most, which is right now.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that HR teams should really be thinking about, is utilizing tools and AI to your benefit to free up time so that you can add that empathetic factor. I do think most HR people enter the field because they want to help people. At least that's been my experience, as most of the people that I've had the pleasure of working with have been very empathetic naturally. But we are also under a lot of pressure.
I do feel that in every difficult decision or situation, an HR person has the opportunity, to show empathy or to have an empathetic approach. It doesn't mean that you'll not do what needs to be done. It just means how you still kind of spend that time on just kind of having a conversation, doing something out of the way, influencing the managers and the management team. That's the role you're expected to play. That is why the function exists. So I think at its very core, you have to have a employee first, empathy led approach. While the title does say HR business partner, but I do believe, and we've always seen people partnership is the biggest part of that. So I think HR people do forget sometimes that they're just not business partners, they are employee partners as well. And I think that needs to come back. That needs to show up in a big way right now.
It does. And to be fair, again, I think most HR people want to be empathetic. They want to be the advocates for employees, but we are beholden to multiple masters and we're under a lot of pressure under most circumstances. So let's turn the conversation to trust, because that was something that I heard loud and clear in some of the feedback that we got, was that people don't really trust HR. And there's a couple of things going on here. One of the things is like the story that we just read. I mean, obviously that is not okay. You do not share confidential information with anybody. I don't care how good friends you are. It's just, no, you don't do that. We have to be able to be trusted and to be able to keep confidences, of course. But the trust factor too, I'm reminded of a story. So very early in my career, and this was the first layoff that I participated in, I was working at this company and I was running the layoff, and the CEO was a lovely guy who was very much kind of a cheerleader type. He was very inspirational. He could get up there and rally the troops like no other. So I came in, my first job was to lay off 30 people. We laid off the 30 people, and then he stood up in front of the company and start talking about how, okay, the company's doing great. We have all these opportunities. And he lost the trust of everybody. How can you say that things are great when we just laid people off? Right.
Yeah.
Then I'm reflective of another CEO that I worked with who did the opposite. He stood up there and said, things are tough. It's horrible. We had a horrible quarter. There's no other way to say it. But these are some things that we're doing to try and get back on track for next quarter. And I've found that the ones that come out and are just transparent and real and show that vulnerability. And so many leaders are afraid to really let that show and really afraid to say everything's not great because they think that that will reduce morale. But actually what it does is the opposite.
Yeah.
It causes people to say, okay, well, but I'm invested in this company as well. What can I do to help? And if you can use that as a call to action for employees, gosh, we had a rough quarter. We are unfortunately going to have to reduce some positions here. Please do everything you can to wish our colleagues well as they leave. And, of course, the door is open if you want to make that statement. But otherwise, be real, be transparent as much as you can to your employees. It really does go a long way.
It does. It does. And you bring a very important point. How is trust earned?
Mm-hmm.
And trust through transparency is the only way I have seen it get better and better with employees.
Mm-hmm.
Like whether it's a policy, whether it is a process, whether it's a big decision, whether it's restructuring, how you transparently share with people rather than, just one fine day people figuring it out or only finding through gossip channels inside the company. That's the sure shot way to lose trust.
Yeah.
So trust through transparency is the way. And more and more, again, this just shows how much better HR teams need to be at communication.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like should not be left to some department or some function, maybe under marketing, having to let communication know. Employee communication, internal communication has to be managed very, very well with transparency. So I think you bring in an excellent point, and one of the companies I worked for had this as a value: trust through transparency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
certainly Shashank is a prime example. Shashank Samant was the CEO of GlobalLogic, and he was a very transparent leader. He was absolutely willing to stand up there and answer any question. And actually, one of the ones that I remember very fondly was Marissa Mayer.
Yeah, I was just hoping you'd talk about that the whole world knows that.
Marissa Mayer, I was fortunate enough to work at Yahoo when she was the CEO there. And there were some things that she did that were absolutely spectacular, in my opinion. She came in and she immediately set up a weekly all hands meeting. And it was every Friday at 4:00. And she did this because she saw that by 2:00 every Friday, the parking lot was empty. And she was like, okay, well, I want to drive more community. So she'd set it up at 4:00 every Friday, and she brought in food and entertainment. And it was always like, it was fun. It was like a great way to end the week. But she had every executive sitting up on that stage. And one of the things that she did that was really great is she created this channel where you could ask any question that you had or make a request or a recommendation, and it could get voted up. And she would open it up live on stage every Friday, and she'd sort them by the most votes that it received, and she'd go down and she'd answer as many as she could. And she would hold the executive team to their feet to the fire. So she'd say, okay, so somebody has an opinion about the current performance review process. So, Brian Power, who was the CPO at the time, Brian, what are you going to do about that? You've got a month to come back and give us an update and an answer. And she kept them to it. And she had somebody on her staff that was tracking all these little sidebar projects and would make people come back and give updates. And things changed, things moved, And I really saw, Yahoo had a very vibrant culture as it was, but it really thrived during my time under Marissa. And it wasn't always easy. We had layoffs, we had a lot of turmoil, but the cultural aspect, people felt heard, and she really built this culture of feedback. And it was just a remarkable place. It was a place where you could go and try new things. You were encouraged to innovate. You were encouraged to try something new. And even if it failed, it was celebrated. That was one of the things she did every Friday. She'd stand up every Friday. And if there was a product that failed or some spectacular failure, she would make that person stand up there and actually celebrate it and say, okay, we did this. This is how it failed. This is why. This is what we learned, and everybody would cheer and applaud because they tried. They tried something new.
And that's a trust journey.
It is. It really is. It made people feel confident to speak up because they knew they weren't going to be shut down. They were going to be listened to. And there was one particular issue that came up time and time again. It was around performance reviews. And people didn't like this one element, and it kept getting brought up and brought up. And she would say, I'm really sorry you don't like this piece, but it's necessary. And these are the reasons why. And she had her points. So people would grumble and say, okay, well, but she's changing everything else, And I thought that type of leadership was really something to emulate, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have all worked with such role models and some not so transparent leaders as well. And that is when the trust equation begins to fail.
Right. Right.
And I believe it's happening more right now than any other times I've seen before. Like this decade has seen the employee trust go down. Like really, really go down, and there are facts and figures to support that.
Well, and one of the things that I would like to point out when it comes to this topic of trusting HR specifically is, and I'm not trying to shirk accountability or responsibility here, not at all, because I think we need to own our work and decisions that are made. But the reality is, if you pull back the curtain, there are many decisions that we have to own and drive forward with that we had nothing to do with making, right? A good example would be layoffs. Every time there's a discussion about the need to do a layoff, hopefully you always have an HR person in the room that's playing devil's advocate and saying, do we really need to cut that many people? Are there other programs that we can cut that would have the same fiscal impact? That should always be our job, of course. But then when it does come to making the decisions around who we need to exit, of course, that needs to be very thoughtful, very, very prepared process, and then handled with the highest level of empathy and care. And I just think I hear so many sad stories about people being laid off, and they just feel like they were treated like a criminal on the way out. And my experience is 9 times out of 10, that's not necessary. Yeah. You do occasionally have somebody that loses it or has a tough reaction, but you deal with that in the moment. It comes out in the moment, right? So just one of those things. And now, so one of the things that we kind of really created at GlobalLogic was the concept of flipping the pyramid, which is a response to a lot of this lack of trust, lack of employees feeling involved or part of the conversation. And what we said was, if you picture a pyramid with the executives on the top, managers in the middle, employees at the bottom, whenever there's like a big problem the company's facing, like, oh, we need to save money, or we're trying to explore a new product line, or we're looking at a new performance management system, whatever the case may be, we tend to go to the executive team to solve it. But we only see like 10% of what's going on in the company. Why are you tapping me? Let's go down into the organization and really activate that group. So if you flip the pyramid with the employees up on the top, this is something we deployed, or we were experimenting with at GlobalLogic. And it started because we didn't understand why our engagement scores were going up so much. And we did focus groups all around the world. And then we ended up creating a management advisory council and an employee advisory council.
Yes.
And every time we had an idea, we would go to them and ask them, is this a good idea, bad idea? And then we would activate them and say, well, what other big problems should we be trying to solve?
Yeah.
And what it did was it got them excited, engaged, and they would become advocates and go back to their teams to participate.
Yeah, I remember those times. And absolutely, like, you make employees co-owners of the decisions that you're making. And it becomes that much easier to then drive any kind of change, positive or negative. There are ways that companies can do that. HR teams can enable that. Just like Amy said, we actually created Employee Advisory Council, Management Council. We meet month on month, week on week, talk about what's going right, what's not going right. If there's a certain policy you wanted to change, we'll just bring it up to them and say, what do you think? And this we are talking about global teams, like people from at least 7 or 8 countries.
It was all over the place.
Coming together, and we will talk about a change in performance management, what needs to happen. Then key in all the takeaways, inputs from employees, from managers, bring it down to the implementation team. the most important thing when you create such groups is how do you follow through on execution?
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's like trust through action. So there is trust through transparency, and then there is trust through listening in, and then driving action based on that. One of the frameworks that I've currently adopted in my organization is connect insights to impact. So you connect, you listen in, you draw insights from there, and then you drive action. And it's a trust building journey for me. When you're totally global and there's no other way, that's the way to build trust. So time and again, whether it's through these employee bodies, whether it's through other types of channels and communication, but trust needs to be driven by one, being transparent, second, taking actions.
Agreed. And we did that also with our survey.
Yeah.
And I've been using that ever since, where you run your annual engagement survey, you get the results back, you take it to that advocacy group.
Yeah.
And we did it with both the employee advocacy group and the management advocacy group. And I said, well, these are the results. What do you think we should focus on? Pick one thing per year that you're going to focus on. And then what can we do? What should we do? And I remember the first time we did this at GlobalLogic, I presented this to a group of employees and said, okay, what do you think we should do? They came back with a really, really great idea, but it was going to cost about $15 million to execute. And I said, well, great idea, can't afford it. So how can we do this in a more economical fashion? And then greater ideas came out. So I think it was also a mentoring process for us to mentor them. Like, you need to think like,
it's also becoming a listening organization where you listen in, you understand, you can reflect on, and then you can have adult conversations around what's possible, what's not. I think when we start treating employees across levels as adults, things start to change, organizations start to change. So flipping the pyramid is just doing that.
Yeah. It's treating people like adults.
Absolutely.
But reaching out to them with, hey, I've got this problem, or I have this challenge, our attrition rates are going up. I don't know what to do about it, guys. And maybe you do know what to do about it, but it's a great way to reach out and say, I need some help here, right? Because most employees want to help. They want to participate. They want their environment to be better.
Yeah.
So just some thoughts. One of the things that flipping the pyramid is really helpful for is creating that trust channel to say, I'm open to feedback, and even the brutal feedback, right? And this is always tough, especially if you have a fancy title like Chief People Officer, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I would travel all over the world and say, I want the feedback. Seriously, give it to me. I'm totally serious. Like, you're safe here. I'm not going to do it. And it took a while to really say, no, I'm serious. Give me the feedback. And then somebody would be brave enough to make a recommendation or make a point, a big piece of feedback, and to see how I would react. And if I flipped out, well, obviously they're not going to trust me. But if I said, oh, wow, thank you for the feedback. And then if I went back and took that forward and tried to do something about it, came back to that person and said, I did this to solve your problem, that helps to build trust. Now, you can't always do that. There are times when you have to say, gosh, that's a really great idea, but I'm really sorry, we can't do that. And this is why, right? But at least you're hearing and doing something with that. But I really believe that some of the best ideas, some of the best solutions come from the people on the ground, employees in the company.
I always get surprised by the kind of ideas that come up.
Yeah.
It's so refreshing. It's just so awesome. Like, I've just very recently, we launched something called Voice of Progress. Now it's not a survey. It's also not a place to vent out, but it's about, like, if we all want to progress, like, what's your voice? What are you saying? And there were just two simple things. So, any idea that you'd like to see us do? And then, any progressive idea. And then the only question that I asked in addition to this one was, what's stopping you? And almost every week I receive around 10 to 15 ideas. And, now, of course, we've started to respond back, implement some, not implement others, but, get back to people why. And it's kind of starting a wave in the company. And that's the kind of power that, when you start to listen in, that has. So absolutely, if you want to flip the pyramid, again, that begins with listening in, transparency, and making some material changes. like green channeling processes. In one of the companies I worked for, one of the things was let's green channel everything. If, as an example, if an employee applies for a leave, day 1, day 2, day 3, manager doesn't approve, it gets approved. Just everything starts to happen. You green channel most of the things, and that brings a change that empowers the employees.
Yeah, yeah. It's also a really great way to learn because we have 5 generations in the workplace, and I'm just reflecting on the metaverse. I got very excited about the metaverse for a while there, thinking, especially during COVID, this could be a solution to the challenge of keeping employees engaged when they're stuck working from home. Maybe create this artificial environment where you can interact more with people. And certainly it has its place. But what was really interesting to me is when I started to ask employees, would you like me to build out a metaverse-like community for you for onboarding or meetings or training and these kind of things? I got different answers. I thought the Gen Zs were going to be the first ones to stand up and say, yes, we want this. This would be great. And they're like, nah, I want to be in the office interacting with human beings one-on-one. And the boomers said the same thing. It was the Gen X and the older millennials that are like, yeah, I'm happy working at home in my PJs. Get me the metaverse so I never have to leave, my dog ever again, So that was interesting. But I really think, especially now with the younger generations coming in, us CPOs who are maybe a little bit grayer in the hair, it's incumbent upon us to learn and listen and hear what they have to say because they have a totally different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. With multiple generations in the workplace today, listening in, leaning in there, just understanding is become even more important. Like we have to be just like any, like the way marketers work, how they understand the segments that they're catering to, and then drive a full product differentiation strategy. So I do feel, HR needs to kind of build on some of those principles as well.
Well, I think, we've definitely heard this feedback loud and clear. And as someone who deeply loves the profession, we felt it was important for us to take a hard look at ourselves from an objective perspective. And so that's why we're talking about these things that maybe we don't have the greatest reputation in, but we do believe that we can improve this and that there are several things that we can do to help drive this forward. So thank you so much for tuning in once again to our podcast and Don't Talk to HR. And so wonderful to see you in person after so long.
Likewise. So I'll just ask all of you, please like, subscribe, share, and do talk to HR.